City of the Living Dead opens in a cemetery in the city of Dunwich, with a priest hanging himself, thus opening one of the gates of hell. This incident impacts a small group of mediums in the midst of a seance, who are mentally connected to the priest. One of the mediums, Mary, dies from shock during the seance. The police investigating pass it off as a drug overdose. News reporter Peter Bell is looking into the circumstances surrounding her death. He shows up at her burial, but the gravediggers leave her plot unfinished. Shortly after they leave, Mary starts to come to, trapped inside the coffin. With one of her last breaths, she screams, Bell hearing her within the coffin. He's quick to get her out, all while in a state of disbelief that this dead woman is alive. For being a fairly simple sequence, Fulci does a great job of instilling suspense. We see hints of Mary regaining consciousness. Something as simple as seeing a mirror inside the coffin fogging up proved quite effective. In the aftermath of the moment, both take up the drive to Dunwich to investigate the death of the priest. In the town of Dunwich, strange phenomena is happening everywhere. People are being brutally murdered, bodies are missing from funeral homes. The town is quick to put the blame on Bob, a man often treated as a pariah by the townspeople. But local psychiatrist Jerry thinks there is something more sinister going on in the town. City of the Living Dead takes a dramatically different approach than Fulci's previous horror effort, Zombie. Zombie had the atmosphere, but relied much more on the gore and horror effects. City of the Living Dead is very much a Lovecraftian supernatural zombie shocker, where the environment and foggy streets of Dunwich are as engrossing as the brain-ripping and gut-puking. The ending of the film is a bit perplexing. We see Jerry and Mary crawl out of a tomb, greeted by John John. John John runs to them, but the pair quickly become terrified as he approaches. Before we can get even a clear idea of what's happening, the image of the little boy breaks up and the credits roll. Despite this unexpected turn, the film up to that point is still a solid horror effort. Screenwriter Dardano Sacchetti was instrumental for this transition between Zombie and City of the Living Dead. During my brief correspondence with Sacchetti in 2010, he mentioned he was the one who introduced Fulci to Lovecraft, and that left a big impression on him. While subsequent films would take cues from this approach, City of the Living Dead shows the strongest implementation of this essence. What helped reinforce this sense of dread was the plainness of the streets of Dunwich. These houses could be on any block in the U.S. I would walk through my neighborhood at night and I would feel like I was in Dunwich. This help gives the film a timeless feel and keeps it from coming off as dated. While acting is not the strongest element to a Fulci film, he makes up for it with a heavy dose of visceral violence, courtesy of Gino De Rossi. The film has a few gore set pieces. A girl regurgitates her own intestines. We have brains being ripped out of skulls. But the best moment has to be when Bob has an industrial drill driven through his head. Not enough can be said about the musical compositions by Fabio Frizzi for City of the Living Dead. The first piece of music we hear sets the tone perfectly. We even get a rearrangement of his theme for Zombie, Mystery's Apotheosis. three leads of the film each bring something different. Catriona MacColl, as Mary, brings an innocence to her role, even a naivety. She just went through a traumatic experience, but manages to maintain some optimism and hope for things working out. MacColl would end up being the one lead to carry over for the remainder of the Gates of Hell trilogy. Carla de Mejo, as Jerry, seems to be the one who is concerned and aware of the gravity of the situation. From his patients to the other townsfolk, he's witnessing firsthand the terror that's bubbling up under the surface of the town. He doesn't want to believe what he's seen, but he can't deny what he's seen is real. Christopher George as Peter is as close as this film gets to a comic relief. He's sarcastic and not above bantering with MacColl. Despite the grim tone of the film, he's clearly enjoying himself. Giovanni Lombardo Radici, a.k.a. John Morgan, continues his role as horror's favorite whipping boy in the role of Bob. When we see this guy in a horror film, you know he's going to get a bad end. He got axed to death in Stage Fright. He had a hole blasted right through his stomach with a shotgun in Cannibal Apocalypse. He had his penis chopped off and then his head cut open in Cannibal Ferox. And he probably wouldn't have it any other way. Keep an eye out for Fulci providing a cameo as the medical examiner. Also, Michel Sauvé plays the boyfriend who is the first to get his brains ripped out by his gut-puking girlfriend. He would become a renowned horror director in his own right, notably with the 1994 comedy horror Cemetery Man, a.k.a. Del Morte del Amor. City of the Living Dead is well worth viewing. There is a nice balance to the gore and the atmosphere. You're just as scared of what you don't see as much as you are of what you do see. This film was a big step forward for Fulci and remains a personal favorite of many of his fans. The Beyond opens in Louisiana in 1927. A lynch mob descends upon a hotel. They pay no attention to the black man at the check-in counter, fearing for his life. They stop at room 36 where a recluse artist, Schweik, is painting. The picture seems to be of an otherworldly place. The mob breaks into his room, labeling him as a heretic, and proceed to beat him with a rusty chain. They drag his body to the cellar. There, they nail him to the wall and dump an acidic substance on him, leaving him to dissolve and die a horrible death. We cut to 1981 at the same hotel. Liza is talking with the architect regarding the renovation work that needs to be done. The interior hasn't been touched in decades. The exterior needs a fresh coat of paint. The basement is flooded. The fact that there's a basement leads me to explain probably the biggest flub this film is guilty of. Louisiana is a state that is below sea level, thus making basements impossible to incorporate into the design of any structure. But this is an Italian horror film, and this creative license works for the story. You can actually visit the house that served as the hotel, the Otis House in Madisonville, Louisiana. This should by now already be like another horror mecca for fans, much like the Monroeville Mall for Dawn of the Dead or the stairs from The Exorcist that can be found in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. One of the painters working on the exterior is frightened by a ghostly face and falls off the scaffolding. Dr. John McCabe is called in to check on the injured worker before driving him to the hospital. Shortly after, the plumber arrives to check out the flooded basement, only for him to die a gruesome death. When the plumber's body is found, so too is the body of Schweik. On the way to town, Liza meets Emily, a blind girl who warns her about the hotel. When these characters meet, it is one of the most visually striking moments of the film. The Lake Pontchartrain Causeway is a unique stretch of road, giving a sense of isolation and otherworldliness that adds significantly to what's a rather cliched moment. More tragedies occur as Liza and John begin to learn more about the history of the hotel. It reaches a point where John suspects Liza of knowing more than she is letting on. The film reaches a point when John acknowledges the hotel is built over one of the 7 gates of hell, thus unleashing the evil upon the world. Without a doubt, The Beyond is the magnum opus for Lucio Fulci in his career. He poured a lot of energy into this film, bringing on the cast and crew he knew would bring his vision to life. Catriona McCullough returns from City of the Living Dead. Cynthia Monreal previously appeared in the Fulci western Silver Saddle, but broke out after appearing in Joe D'Amato's Beyond the Darkness. Fulci regular Al Cliver has a side role. 2 of the Dell'Acqua brothers return as zombies. We have Araviano and Roberto. Roberto has his moment as a zombie that smashes a window and grabs Liza by the hair. On the behind-the-scenes arena, we have cinematographer Sergio Salvati, editor Vincenzo Tomasi, effects artist Gino De Rossi, and writer Dorando Sacchetti, all filling in their respective parts. Further adding to the epic feel of the film, you have a grand score by Fabio Frizzi. Joining him are Goblin members Agostino Marangolo and Maurizio Guarini. With regards to the music score, I still have my copy of Requiem in Blood that I bought off of Blackest Heart Media before they closed down. It's a double soundtrack for both City of the Living Dead and The Beyond, and I am never letting it go. Unfortunately, for a long time, the film was only seen in America in a butchered, R-rated version entitled The 7 Doors of Death. Thankfully, Grindhouse Releasing and Quentin Tarantino revived the original version of the film. The Beyond received a packed to the gills with special features DVD release and a limited midnight screening tour in October of 2000. And I believe Arrow Video has released a new edition for it as well in the past couple of years, so you have your options with finding copies of this film. The Beyond is a fairly influential film in its own right. Probably one of my favorite examples of such would be seen in the 2002 remake of Capcom's Resident Evil. There is a sequence where your character goes into a bathroom with a tub filled with dirty water. When you unplug the tub, a zombie rises out of the water. This is an exact recreation of a scene where the zombie plumber rises out of a bathtub of dirty water. Another instance is a bit more complex to explain. Bob Murawski was the editor for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movie in 2002. He's also the co-founder of Grindhouse Releasing, who restored Fulci's film. Murawski took a shot from the infamous tarantula scene in The Beyond and incorporated it into Peter Parker's fever dream after he's bitten by the radioactive spider. Raimi was impressed with how the 20-year-old shot worked well with his film. The Beyond retains the interest in Lovecraftian lore. The Book of Eibon is associated with Lovecraft contemporary Clark Ashton Smith. Lovecraft was impressed so much that he incorporated Eibon into his stories, like the dreams in the witch house and the horror in the museum. Fulci was livid with the Italian distributors when they artificially connected his film Zombie with Romero's Dawn of the Dead. With The Beyond, he worked with a German distributor instead. Originally, Schweik was the only zombie in the film, but the distributor wanted to capitalize on the success of Zombie and wanted Fulci to incorporate more zombies. From this request, we got the zombie hospital sequence. We already touched on the frequent collaborators, and there are plenty of new faces within this production from Fulci. David Warbeck makes the role of John McCabe his own, when it feels like it could have been written for Carlo De Mejo. Antoine St. John made a name for himself in the Leone Western, A Fistful of Dynamite, and he gives a sense of reluctance and innocence to Schweik before he becomes the vengeful zombie. As I mentioned earlier, there are plenty of copies of this film available online. This is definitely one to own. Not only is it a great film, but there is no shortage of great bonus features to help fill you in on the reputation and making of this film. Add this gem to your collection ASAP if it isn't already. Next we get to the final installment of the trilogy, The House by the Cemetery. After the mysterious death of his colleague, Dr. Norman Boyle moves to the town of New Whitby to pick up and continue the unfinished work. However, his son, Bob, has been warned not to go by a little girl. Bob's pleas go ignored and the family settles in. The house was also available at a cheap price. During their stay, bizarre events and gruesome murders occur. Dr. Boyle finds a recording of his colleague's descent into madness. The scene immediately recalls a similar moment from M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense, where Bruce Lee listens to a tape of one of his sessions. The house belonged to a Dr. Freudstein, a scientist reputed to engage in strange experiments and procedures. Could Freudstein be behind these incidents? Could he still even be in the house? House by the Cemetery stands as an odd film out compared to the other entries of the Gates of Hell trilogy. Fulci seems to be taking more after Stephen King than H.P. Lovecraft, given the New England setting of the small town of New Whitby. Also, the film ends on a light note compared to the ambiguous nihilistic endings of both City of the Living Dead and The Beyond. Dardando Cecchetti returned as a co-writer for the script. Enjoying Italian horror requires a few caveats. Most importantly, one needs to look past plot incoherency in favor of the imagery and set design. The town of New Whitby is presented with a dreamlike aura. Fulci reveled in the visuals similar to his contemporary Dario Argento and his mentor Mario Bava. Fulci's mix of gore and atmosphere were a hallmark of his two previous Gates of Hell entries, and House by the Cemetery is no exception. With the isolated house setting, Fulci gives the film a sense of claustrophobia, with the tight shots and close-ups, not unlike Kubrick's work on The Shining. The film doesn't have the apocalyptic implications of either City of the Living Dead or The Beyond. The terror is limited to the people directly connected with the house. Fulci's visual trademarks are still present: lingering establishing shots, close-up of the eyes, wide angles. He never fails to perfectly capture the environment of his film. Sergio Salvati came back as the director of photography, as did editor Vincenzo Tomasi. Also presented is Fulci's willingness to engage in cinema taboos, notably the tense scene of Bob stuck in the basement. Dr. Boyle grabs a hatchet to break down the door. He tells Bob to step away from the door, but Freudstein holds Bob's head against the door. As Dr. Boyle takes the hatchet to the door, he comes close to killing his own son in the process. Gorehounds, fear not. There is still plenty of splatter horror that made Fulci famous, courtesy of Gino De Rossi. Knives are stabbed into heads, decapitations aplenty, many disembowelments. His work on the makeup of the Freudstein monster is a sight to behold, but it's a shame many of the DVD covers spoil it. The name origins of the monster Freudstein are intriguing on their own. The first half refers to psychoanalysis innovator Sigmund Freud, known for finding meaning in dreams and objects. The latter half comes from Victor Frankenstein, the fictional scientist that gave life to a patchwork man, made from the limbs and organs of dead bodies. Pairing both opens up speculation. Both were seen as figures who reveled in eschewing the norms and mores of civilization. Instead of Fabio Frizzi, film score duties were handed over to Walter Rizzati. While Frizzi took up an orchestral sound, Rizzati went with a synth guitar-heavy score. Simply compared to the more complex compositions by Frizzi, these pieces by Rizzati are still effective, particularly the main theme, I Remember. has that Castlevania feel, doesn't it? Returning is Katrina McCall as the increasingly distressed wife, Lucy Boyle. This is a different personality compared to the innocence of Mary in City of the Living Dead or the determined Liza in The Beyond. McCall is very much channeling Shelley Duvall from Kubrick's The Shining. Paulo Malco plays Dr. Norman Boyle. It is implied he's having an affair with one of the townspeople. You have the landlord of the house recognizing Boyle, yet he denies ever having been to New Whitby. It's quickly brought up, but soon dismissed in favor of the horror shenanigans. Giovanni Freza plays Bob. Reportedly, Freza hated the dubbing for his character. He said he sounded too much like a girl. Fair enough considering the dubbing for future roles in films like Manhattan Baby and Warriors of the Wasteland were much more fitting. Other people returned from previous entries. Carlo De Mejo and Gianpaolo Saccarola play members of the library staff. Fulci cameos as a colleague of Dr. Boyle. Giovanni Da Nova, probably best known as the plumber from The Beyond, plays the Freudstein monster. The final film in the Gates of Hell trilogy maintains the tone, atmosphere, and gore of the previous films. The cast and crew adapt to the new feel of changing inspiration. This helps set House by the Cemetery apart from the previous two entries.
You are in a room filled with your friends, but they are all dead. Suddenly, one by one, they begin to move, to live again.
What the hell are they?
Zombie.
How can we stop them?
Here, take this.
Zombie. They are decaying. They are missing from their graves.
Shut up!
Zombie. It's shocking. That's why no one under 17 will be admitted.
Save me.
Zombie opens with a mysterious sailboat floating aimlessly in New York Harbor, nearly colliding with the Staten Island ferry. A pair of harbor patrolmen pull up to the boat and climb on board to investigate. While looking around, one of the officers is suddenly attacked by a man hiding on the boat. The officer is bitten in the neck, quickly bleeding to death. Then the attacker goes after the other officer. The attacker is shot and falls overboard. None of the shots hit the attacker in the head. The dead officer is soon taken to the medical examiner for an autopsy. As the examiners prep, he begins to show signs of movement. The police investigation finds the boat belongs to the father of Anne Bowles. Her father disappeared shortly after a visit to the Antilles. She encounters news reporter Peter West, who turns up with information about the whereabouts of Anne's missing father. They make plans to fly to the Caribbean. Anne and Peter meet a couple on holiday who are taking a tour of the islands. Peter requests a ride to Matul, an island known to be cursed. The couple reluctantly agrees to take Anne and Peter with them. While the group searches for Matul, Dr. Menard is studying a bizarre disease that has taken over the island. He's determined to find out what is going on despite the vehement protests of his wife. Dr. Menard's assistant thinks it's voodoo, but Menard, a man of science, refuses to believe that's the case. Lucio Fulci's Zombie, also known as Zombie 2 and Zombie Flesh Eaters, was the first Fulci film for many. I remember going to Hollywood Video and seeing the box cover for Zombie, the iconic worm eye, and the great tagline, "We are going to eat you." If this is the case for you, then you have Jerry Gross to thank for that. He distributed Zombie in America. In the wake of the release and worldwide monster success of George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, Zombie stands out as the first high-profile film distributed to cash in on the success of the Romero classic. Dawn of the Dead was released in foreign markets as Zombie, which led to Fulci's Zombie being distributed in some markets as Zombie 2, giving a false impression that Fulci's film was related to Romero's film. A common occurrence in Italian cinema distribution. Plot-wise, the film takes cues more from Jacques Tourneur's I Walked with a Zombie or the Bela Lugosi classic White Zombie for the atmosphere and adhering to the geographical origins of the zombie lore. Lucio Fulci's Zombie is an endearing horror gem for a plethora of reasons. There is the classic underwater fight between a zombie and a shark. Thankfully, the contest doesn't yield the asylum caliber concept of a zombie shark. However, the underwater zombie does implicate how New York was overrun at the end of the film. Then there's the infamous eye-piercing scene that was so effective, even effects master Tom Savini admired the execution.
When I saw Zombie, that was in the days of, we had just done Dawn of the Dead, you know? So to me, it was like, well, what are they going to do? How are they going to top us, you know? That eyeball going through an eye. Even Dawn of the Dead, you know, the guy who's zombie gets a screwdriver through his ear, you know, fine. That, it was slow, you know? So you had all this time to be scared and waiting for it, and then it paid off. I mean, it actually goes in.
The scene shows Fulci's knack for building tension and suspense to the point of inducing anguish on the viewer and showing the payoff of the moment as well. Wormeye, the box cover zombie, makes a grand entrance with a dreamlike quality. The geyser of blood that flows from his victim after he bites their neck adds a hyper-realism to the horror. Last, you have the closing shot of zombies walking across the Washington Street Bridge, undeniably impressive guerrilla filmmaking. You just have to ignore the traffic going below as if zombies were the norm. I discussed Lucio Fulci on a more extensive basis on episode 17 for his Gates of Hell trilogy. Fulci had directed films in multiple genres before Zombie, westerns like Silver Saddle and 4 of the Apocalypse, giallo films like The Psychic, Don't Torture a Duckling, and Lizard in a Woman's Skin. He made 2 White Fang films with Franco Nero, comedies with the duo of Franchi and Agrassi were his spin on Abbott and Costello. Early in his career, he dabbled in music comedies like Ragazzi del Jukebox and Howlers of the Dock. Fabio Frizzi worked on the score for Zombie. His main theme sets the tone perfectly. He manages to create music that ranges, whether it's levity, or tension. The theme for Zombie would be reworked for later films like City of the Living Dead and Manhattan Baby. Frizzi would collaborate with Fulci, becoming creatively intertwined a la Hitchcock and Herman. The gore and makeup effects in this film are courtesy of Gianetto de Rossi, who previously did the effects for the Italian zombie prototype Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, aka Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, which I discussed on episode 13, Zombie Innovators and Game Changers. De Rossi also worked on other films for Fulci, City of the Living Dead, The Beyond, and House by the Cemetery. Other credits include Once Upon a Time in the West, Conan the Destroyer, Rambo 3, and Man in the Iron Mask. The use of potter's clay for the zombies were an effective change of pace from the Savini method of bluish-gray makeup. We previously mentioned male lead Ian McCulloch for episode 19, The Video Nasties, for his turn in the horror sci-fi film Alien Contamination. This was the first of 3 forays by McCulloch in Italian horror. McCulloch throws on the charm as Peter West, adding some cheeky humor into a grim horror film. Tisa Farrow plays the female lead, Ann Bowles. She really sells the terror of the zombies. She puts them over big time. Farrow was also brought up in the Video Nasties episode for her similar role in Joe D'Amato's Anthropophagus. Al Cliver and Audretta Gay bring a meekness to the couple that agree to accompany Peter and Anne. You feel sympathy for them because they have no idea what awaits them on the island of Matul. I haven't seen Audretta Gay in other films, but Al Cliver was a regular in European horror, working frequently with Fulci and the infamous Jess Franco. Richard Johnson gives the film much credibility as Dr. Menard. He's well aware of the danger his wife and him are in, but he tries to maintain his determination in solving the riddle of the Matul plague. Johnson was originally the choice for James Bond by director Terrence Young. He's best known for his performance as Dr. Mark Waite in Robert Wise's The Haunting. Zombie is a grand example of what horror is capable of. Gory, eye-catching, atmospheric. For many, including myself, this was our first impression of Fulci, and he started on the right foot with many viewers. And for that introduction, we have Jerry Gross to thank for that.
And now for a look at the local news. Rubbish collectors on the north side had an unpleasant surprise this morning when one of the containers they were collecting proved to be holding the remnants of a local woman who apparently had been mutilated and dismembered with a power saw.
Good morning.
What the hell are you doing here?
Well, I slept in here. It's a lot quieter than that building site, and nobody wakes you up getting rid of dead bodies.
Touch of Death centers on Lester Parson, a serial killer with cannibalistic tendencies. He picks his victims from the classifieds, singling out wealthy widows who may not be considered the most attractive. He records them on video in sexual situations before he kills them and cooks a chunk of their remains. The leftovers he chops up and dumps the body. Add to that, he's a schizophrenic who has conversations with himself via audio tape recordings. Things go fine until one attempt is filled with mistakes. One woman nearly gets the best of him until he bashes her head in. When he dumps the body, it is witnessed by a homeless man. Later, the transient tries to blackmail Lester and succeeds, only to be the victim of vehicular homicide committed by Lester. Somehow, the homeless man is able to survive long enough to offer a description of his assailant. Now it is a matter of time before Lester may be caught. Touch of Death was a late career entry in Fulci's filmography. The film lacks the ethereal dreaminess of the likes of City of the Living Dead, The Beyond, or House by the Cemetery. Instead, we get the over-the-top gore and pitch-black humor. Such a shift in tone compared to earlier efforts that I couldn't help but be captivated by the film. We have a small cast and a few set locations. Both imply this film was made on the cheap and on a short production schedule. Fulci himself wrote the script, which has its moments of misogyny. The depiction of women with unconventional bodies. One had hairy moles on her breasts and facial deformities. One had a scar on her upper lip. It's going to raise some eyebrows. Angelo Mattai provided the makeup effects. He's not a Gianetto de Rossi. When the corpse is chopped up with a chainsaw, you can tell it's a mannequin dummy with gore on the inside. The gore effects for the car kill are so ridiculous, you find it hard to believe he was alive long enough to inform the police. Mattai's other effects credits include Lamberto Bava's Demons and the classic Gincata. Carlo Maria Cordillo, the go-to composer for Joe D'Amato and Claudio Fragasso, composed the music for Touch of Death. A few of the cues from this film, specifically the music imitating the stabbing strings from Psycho, would make their way to Troll 2 2 years later. Brett Halsey took on the role of Lester Parson. Halsey was a TV actor starting back in 1953. In the late 80s and 90s, he worked frequently with Fulci. Some of those films may appear in future episodes for the month. Earlier in the decade, he was on classics like Airwolf, Dukes of Hazzard, Knight Rider, and Charlie's Angels. His work in the Italian film industry goes back to the spaghetti westerns of the late 1960s. As Parson, Halsey has a charm, and you can buy into him wooing these women. Fulci regular Al Cliver took on the role of Randy, a bookie who has his sights on Lester for gambling debts. Cliver is almost unrecognizable from his look in films like Zombie and the Beyond. You can put them side by side and they look like two completely different people. It's just a fantastic transformation on the part of Al Cliver. Touch of Death was a radical departure to the type of horror film I associated with Lucio Fulci, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The movie moves at a brisk pace thanks to the script by Fulci and Brett Halsey as Lester Parson, moving the film forward. The comedic violence helps as well. If you're only accustomed to Fulci's supernatural horror films, give this one a watch.